Hello and welcome to our daily sketching routine. It is Sunday, December 8th, 2024, and the topic today will be sketching clouds with some tips and tricks thrown in. Always good to have some tips and tricks. And welcome back if you are returning. Welcome if you're new. I sketch and post every day and set timers. Usually 5 minutes, that's what I'll stick with today. And if you just want to use that to develop a daily sketching habit, you can do that. So I started a 5-minute timer, and yeah, let's get started. So this will be a continuation of yesterday's video. I'll put a link to that. But basically this page ended up being about the elements and sketching the elements and textures. So we have wood and earth. Here's a stone texture, and then water. Now, I made videos of these too, but I'm just going to post a link to yesterday's video, which also has the link to the other ones. So that's kind of how I tend to work, is sort of whatever kind of inspires me, and it's usually like a certain topic. And then yesterday was fire, and I'll talk about that for a little bit before getting started here. But yeah, we'll do clouds here in no particular order. It's just what we ended up with. I wasn't planning on doing the elements, but it's kind of a cool idea, and that's kind of a tip maybe on keeping a sketchbook, where you can come back to the page, so you don't have to feel like you have to complete a sketchbook page. You really shouldn't even feel like you have to complete anything in the sketchbook, as a matter of fact. But yeah, I like to just kind of get something started and come back to it later, and maybe have a certain topic or theme on the page, or not. You don't have to do that either. But half of it is just being able to just start sketching on a blank page. So you can see that I originally sketched this last month. So that's one thing I wanted to talk about, is just kind of how to have fun with a sketchbook page and draw things you don't normally draw. And then the other thing is that in yesterday's video, I had used this white marker. I mean, I use different tools, and when I use them, I'll just kind of mention what I'm using, so I don't have to constantly repeat the same thing. But I mean, I get that sometimes these are the first videos you're seeing. But so one thing was, I said that you can kind of get a faded or a kind of smoky look because it was fire. And I thought this ink would fade more. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. It depends on how dry, like when you put the ink on it, or how many layers of this marker. So it didn't really fade too much right here, because I went in with this pen on top of the white paint. But you'll notice that when you paint over like the black area, it does kind of have a gray look to it. And so with that in mind, that's kind of what happened with this Phoenix. And so that's why sometimes it's good to let it dry, because I'm not going to do too much, because I kind of want to look up ideas for the Phoenix. But I mean, I can kind of go off of what I see here, because I want to make it look kind of like glowing fire, and maybe more like feathers kind of thing. But So you can work in layers, kind of like that. So in that way you can kind of get more of a glowing effect, or building up the highlights. And that's might be all you want to do for the sketch, but it gives you ideas for more completed work. So with that said, let's do some sketching. So yeah, I'll just fill out this sketchbook page, and even when I fill out like the whole page, I like to be able to go back and, if I feel like it, sketch some more or just leave it. So that's 5 minutes. I'll start another one, and that leads me to sort of the next kind of tips and tricks. And it's the idea of sketching in stages, and I might do a video specifically about that, although I bring it up a lot. So the idea is that, and I'll do that here. So I had just talked about like kind of doing a sketchbook spread or a sketch page or something, whatever you want to call it, but it kind of goes together, whether it's the theme or like the style or the technique, or the fact that it's just kind of random can also be kind of the theme. So what I'll do is kind of do that, kind of connect like the composition basically. And so part of this is just me warming up, so there's that, just kind of get into the hand-eye coordination. But yeah, I wanted to talk about like the different stages. So you don't have to do it this way. That's the thing with art. There's no one way to do it. There's actually kind of an infinite way to do it, and that's what makes it interesting. But the way you organize it, again, that's why I call it tips and tricks. That's why I don't say like this is how you should do it. But one thing that helps, for example, and this is just my experience, is just based on the fact that I've drawn for a long time and a lot. So one thing is that it helps to see like I'm not really even doing that. So that maybe that'll be a good example. So I was gonna say, if it helps, so one thing that would help is if you take these ideas that I'm talking about and use a pencil, for example. That might help. That might be, because I don't know where you're at, that would be the easier way, but that doesn't take anything away from it. So it's kind of like cooking, which I like to use as an analogy because I don't really cook, although I used to work at a restaurant, and so I had to cook because I was a manager at a restaurant, worked my way up. So that's a kind of another story too, which I'll probably talk about on and off, which I already have. But yeah, I mean, you can do things in different ways, but there's kind of a more organized way, so that, because I had to train people also, and also I was trained to do stuff. So yeah, some of the stuff that I'm saying, use it however, like if it helps to use a pencil. For me, for example, some of what I do is just because I'm making a video and talking about stuff, so it's for the sake of the time and like the demo and stuff. So back to what I was saying, the first pass can just be, well, this actually was a warm-up. So I have videos where I talk about doodling and scribbling and stuff, and just sketching in general. So that's one way to approach your work, and also to get started like on a blank sketch page, or even when you're returning after a while, it can just kind of help you get back into it. So that's one of the tips that I can talk about. The other is clouds are really interesting. So I'm just going to do an actual cloudscape. So it's just going to be nothing but clouds. So part of it is obviously there's all kinds of different clouds. I'm not going to go into all the different kinds of clouds, but I'm mainly going to talk about how to, like, different ways of approaching. There's so many ways to draw clouds, so, and paint them. That's 5 minutes. I'll start another 5-minute timer. This will be going on to the 15th minute. And I love drawing and sketching clouds because I actually like a lot of landscape stuff, such as water or trees or mountains and stuff, but I don't always get to see those things living in the city. But clouds are always available, so that's one thing. So definitely use that as reference, and then of course you can take photos. So that's really kind of the best thing to do, is just kind of look at some photos and stuff. However, sometimes it's good to invent it, and sometimes that's the best thing to do for the whatever you're working on. So now that I got kind of warmed up, so what happens with cloudscapes that I find interesting is that you can combine a lot of different lighting, a lot of different shading and drawing. So I'll just kind of start with, some of this was just intuitive. Part of it was just combining the composition, the sketch page. So that's kind of a good point, actually, because clouds, when you add them, since they can kind of look so many different ways, you can make a lot of artistic choices with them. It can help to bring the composition together. You can decide to make them look more pronounced. Like, usually they're supposed to be kind of in the background, like literally, of the picture, but then sometimes they're actually the focal point. So the other thing is that you can play around with the edges. So for example, you can kind of draw in the shape, and so in a way they're kind of like mountains, but like you can actually be kind of jaggedy with it, and it would kind of work. So for example, right here, I'm just going to draw in kind of like mountains, but it can still kind of work as clouds, strangely enough. So what I did here was sort of establish the sky, but even that can be kind of different in the rest of the picture because the sky is so vast, kind of like sketching the ocean. I mean, you can have different lighting situations because it's pretty wide open space. So with this cloud, this is kind of far in the distance, so I sort of sketched it, the outline of it. The other approach could be sort of what I just did, but if you want to have a more like a softer edge, you can do this. And I find that when I'm sketching clouds, it's good to, and also in general, but it's good to approach it in stages. So this would be the first pass where I establish one. You could either just sketch it out, or if you're not going to outline the cloud, because that's how you can have the different, because when you look at clouds or look at photos of them or paintings of them, sometimes it's good to have some that look very defined and then some are more vague, because it creates more space and more volume in the composition. So if you're just kind of sketching the soft edge like this, where you're not outlining it, then this would be like the first pass of that, because you're basically drawing the clouds. The other option is to actually just outline them. So that's another approach, is to draw the outline. And if you compare, so you can go back in, and although these are kind of jaggedy looking, so what it is you can add little details to so they'll look kind of jaggedy, because sometimes clouds kind of look like that. So that's 5 minutes. I'll start another one. So this is going into the 20th minute. So I might not be able to shade it a whole lot, but I'll do it in there's just explain the stages. So the first one could be this, if you just are still figuring out the shape of the clouds, but notice like the edges are a lot softer looking. This one I outlined, but then notice how on this one, if I go back over it kind of like this, it'll look more defined. And then so that's just the line weight. And so clouds can have all of these different things going on, and especially for a cloudscape where the picture is basically just the clouds themselves, it's good to have as much variety and do it in stages, and then also kind of come back. And also clouds are those things where you can, so this is the element of air, by the way, are one of those things that you can kind of work on, sort of kind of like water, like the ocean. If you do like a seascape kind of thing, you can sort of work on it forever. So that's another reason it's good to have sort of stages. But so going back to this, so that's kind of one of the approaches, just for the edges. But then the second pass is sort of about like the light and the shade. And clouds can also have quite a wide range of values. You can keep it very simple. So for example, back here, you might just have like the dark of the sky, and then just leave that, like, because it's already outlined. And so the outline right here is already a value. So you're already saying that light is coming from over here. But the thing with clouds is you can kind of have light reflecting all over the place. But it's good just as the artist to kind of decide, like, so I kind of already decided that generally light's coming from over here just because of this outline. But you'll notice that here I sort of threw in this random cloud, but it would work because there's so much space and so much volume to the composition and like the forms and stuff, so that you actually could have a cloud that's right here closer to us. So that's kind of, we could say that that's like the foreground just to begin with. You could actually have even more of a foreground cloud right here, and this one could just be floating right in the front here. But it's good to do it in stages. So like this would be the sketch, and then let's start to establish some of the shading. So I'm going to say that this is part of the shading because I outlined this side, so it looks like light is shining on the right side of these clouds. The other thing would be, and this is just kind of particular to clouds, so they can kind of have a shadow sort of like covering the whole shape here in the foreground. And again, this is just an approach, but sometimes they'll pick up like the rim light. And so if you're doing pen and ink, the highlights are kind of important, so that's why it's good to kind of do it in stages like this. So for example, the brightest area will be right here where I'm not shading it. And if you really want to emphasize that, then you would, the other thing also, especially with the pen and ink, the direction of the pen strokes says a lot. It also separates the different clouds or layers of clouds. So for example, here you can outline this way, and if I want to kind of do the same thing just by the direction of the pen strokes. Now I'm saying pen strokes, but it's the same with pencil. It could be the same with paint, like whatever. Maybe with paint it's also color is sort of the same thing, as far as similar color will sort of go together. So that's another 5 minutes. So start another one, maybe aim for 30 minutes or more. There's a lot. I mean, clouds teach you a lot about drawing. So for example, I can make this compositionally sort of connect like the different layers of the composition. So that's an idea. The other thing is, like I said, like the direction of the pen stroke. So if I go like this, sort of, so here I went kind of vertical like this. You can use horizontal strokes, and again that creates a lot of the, so if I want to separate this, I can go like this. So the direction of it, the horizontal, also the width of it, the line. So you can have different kinds of lines. So that way you can separate this from the background, or this particular cloud or form. It's their forms, without outlining it. So that's one way to do it. And so you can see that the direction of the pen stroke, the distance between the pen strokes. And so it's good to go in stages, because a lot of times less is more. That's the mantra. If you overdo it, you can't really, you kind of have to keep going forward. And that's also why it's good to kind of go as far as you can. So this would be like the second stage, is what I'm doing right now. And then kind of come back to it, and you'll see more shapes and more ideas. So for example, like that could be a cloud, or I could just leave it. That could be two clouds, is what I'm saying. So if you want to create another cloud in front of it, you can. But that's one of those things that's kind of in your subconscious. It's sort of just based on what you see subconsciously, or kind of abstractly, because that's what clouds are. So you'll notice that as I do this, cross-hatching is kind of its own thing. I'll talk about it here. I mean, I talk about it a lot, and I demonstrate it a lot because that's what I do the most. But you can see that even with cross-hatching, I want to keep it sort of at the second stage, meaning I've already kind of established the values right here. So you have the darkest dark, you have the white of the paper being at the far end of the values, and then you have the midtone being here. So I'm saying like this is the midtone, but it's the balance of those things. There's no, it's just whatever looks interesting. So there's no like, oh, you have to make everything look gray. So it doesn't mean like you have to shade everything as the midtone, and then it just depends. So for example, if you really want to make this cloud right here, this kind of in the foreground, if you really want to make this kind of stand out, part of that is going to be because of the outline of it, which is like the definition part of it. I'm going to kind of stick with sort of the same general lighting, although it doesn't have to be, because clouds are has so much sort of variety and volume within just this one composition, because there could be clouds in front of this and over it. So I could actually do a complete different lighting. So that's what makes it interesting. But the second pass is really about kind of establishing like the overall light and dark pattern. But yeah, I mean, you want to just kind of take your time, and once you kind of do these in stages, then you don't have to think so hard about it. But if you do, like, so the next thing would be, the third pass would be kind of what I'm going to do here, where you have the light. So this is you have the light area. You establish kind of the basic light and dark right here. So that's 5 minutes. I'll start another one and start to wrap it up. It's a good amount for the video. And then, so the third pass, so the stages are good because, for example, if I left it like this, it's enough for me to come back. It makes me want to keep working on it, and that's really the point, because ultimately these sketches are for you. It's for you to learn from. You meaning all of us, the artist. So that's why I kind of like to do it in stages, because if one area is so complete and then the rest isn't, it's not motivating to me personally, because it looks like a lot of work, because then I think, oh, I got to make everything look like that. But if you kind of go in stages and keep everything sort of going at the same pace. So for example, this is like the second stage, and this is a little bit more than that. This is starting to go into the third stage, which is like the small shape. So notice how it looks more defined, and like today I went in and added more highlights. So you'll notice with that paint marker, like there's a little bit more detail now, because it grays out, but then if you layer it, it gets lighter. But yeah, the third stage is really about, once you establish this part, then you kind of decide how much definition, and just make your shapes, one, more detailed, which is smaller shapes. The other is you can have more of a value range, so, and like a more detailed lighting. So for example, back here, I might not do anything. Sometimes I like to leave it like that. I think it's the best option. But with these smaller shapes, you could have it be more like a sphere. So you could have some reflected light, and just kind of, so this is basically when you're pushing the values is, I mean, that's what I'd say, and I mean, I think other people say that, but you'll notice that there's more of a value range, and so it pushes it forward. That kind of thing. And so this would be kind of like the third, and you don't necessarily need to do it to the whole thing. I find it more interesting usually not to do that, so that some areas will be more simple looking and then some will be more detailed and complex looking. So that's how you kind of come up with a cloudscape from imagination, but definitely look at reference and maybe use these tips and tricks to see if it helps you draw clouds and just kind of have fun with them. I mean, they're fun to sketch. And they do teach you a lot of, I mean, pretty much anything you draw or are interested in drawing can teach you how to draw better. That's why I don't really care like what I draw, because this stuff helps with drawing people, because it's, at the end of the day, it's shapes and lines and forms and composition. I mean, that's the other thing too, is like, if you kind of, again, if this is the third stage of the sketch, you can go in and do this, and just the proportion of it, like the scale of it, by darkening some of this, will imply that this is back there, but it's further away. And yeah, like the direction of the strokes will show sort of the lighting and the form. So yeah, as we wrap this up, I don't think I started a timer, but it should be about 5 minutes. Yeah, as we wrap up, I want to thank you for joining me for today's daily sketching routine. Hopefully you come back, and if you like these videos, please support the channel. I appreciate it. And until next time, keep on sketching.